When Porsche created the Boxster, they created a car that people have been whining about ever since. Oh, it's not a real Porsche, the only real Porsche is the 911, and on and on and on ad nauseam. Never mind that it helped to save Porsche or that they created more of an extremely good thing. The other concern from Porsche was that in creating this car, that they would actually cannibalise their own business model and pull sales away from the 911 into the cheaper and less powerful Boxster. Porsche have come so very close over the years to producing a car that is nearly but not quite as good as the 911, keeping the Halo model in their range intact. Well, I am here to tell you that in fact they've done it every year with the Boxster, and I don't mean the GT4 or the Cayman R. The regular Boxsters are, by one very important measure, better than all regular 911s and by a massive margin. I will show you how this works and show you the simple equation which proves it, and I will change the way you think about Porsche's hitherto lowest model of sports car. But before I do, let's go through the Boxster's history just as a reminder of which models are which. It is hard to believe actually that the story began so long ago in 1996. By the time the Porsche Boxster came along, of course, the 911 was already a legend, having been in production for 33 years and having raced and won very many races and titles, not to mention defining what a usable sports car was and still is to this day. But Porsche was struggling badly. By 1996, the heady days of 80s success was a memory. No longer were city whiz kids in their red braces beating down the doors of their local Porsche dealers to spend some of their vast bonuses on the latest 911. Sales were very slow indeed in the financial storm that followed the sunny days, and whilst the 964 and 993 were both good, well-built cars, there just wasn't the margin in them to keep Porsche afloat. So along with the new higher margin 996, along came the 986 Boxster. Porsche went for margin as well as volume, and this is the reason that the Boxster should be kept in our hearts as the car that helped to save Porsche. These cars weren't perfect, but then neither is the idea of mounting an engine behind the rear wheels, and look how that turned out. Porsche designed the Boxster as more than a nod to the 550 Spider and the Porsche 718 of the 50s and early 60s. Cars that weren't produced in mass numbers back then and were primarily racing cars, but as a result gave the new Boxster heritage and pedigree, a smart move. Porsche has continued to use this during the Boxster range too, with the RS60 Spider models and now of course reusing the 718 moniker. I suspect, however, unless you are a genuine Porsche nerd, this might be lost on most people, and understandably so. Maybe why people position this car as a poor man's 911 convertible, which was, again, a position you could understand when the first Boxster has exactly the same front end as the then Porsche 996. Actually though, given the Boxster was launched prior to the 996, it may be more accurate to say that the 911 looks like the Boxster rather than the other way round. Something that irritated 911 owners and helped to create the stigma around the Porsche Boxster and created a negative narrative for it. A 550 Spider for the modern age with its own identity is one thing, but a smaller 911 just isn't cricket, old boy. To make matters worse, the first two series of Porsche Boxsters shared the same engine as its elder brother and, I'm afraid to say, the same problems. The M96 and M97 engines that were used in the Porsche 996 and 997 series were also used in the Boxster in the 986 and 987 ranges, which I will describe shortly, and with those came the intermediate shaft bearing issues. Have a look at the 1993 Porsche Boxster concept though and see how close the production car got to it. The pity is for it that it was just too similar to the 911 of the time. I think they've aged extremely well though, as good design so often does. And remember, I am here to show you why all of this stigmatism and negative narrative is all baloney, and why the Boxster is the one you should be buying. We'll get to that in just a minute though. Before we do that, let's just take a quick reminder on the different models of Porsche Boxster. So there have been, in fact, 4 iterations of Porsche Boxster since 1996. The 986, which as I said generally was around during the 996's lifetime and shared a version of its engine. The 987, which was around during the time of the 997 and again had the same engine in detuned form. The 981, which was the baby brother of the first generation 991 and was the last Boxster with a 6-cylinder engine. And the 718 we've had since 2016, and the Porsche 991.2 and 992 of today. Generally speaking, the Boxster range has been pretty simple to understand. You have a standard model and an S model with a bit more power. As I mentioned earlier, Porsche was so careful not to compete with its own 911 models, and it was a good 10 years before they started releasing slightly more powerful cars and special models of Spider. But even they were some way adrift of the power of a 911. People took to these cars, and Porsche had a real winner on its hands. Mercifully, the volume seller that it needed actually transpired, and they sold in their hundreds of thousands. The elitism that propagated some negativity should be totally ignored. It is utterly wrong. Here's the reason why. The simple equation that blows 911 purists out of the water and shows that actually the Porsche Boxster of any generation is a 911 killer. It is the Porsche sports car to own. The best car that they produce if you're looking for the most amount of fun for the least amount of money. Yes, the balance of fun and cost. That's what all good Porsche fanatics or beginners should be able to agree on, surely. The equation that everyone is looking to understand. What is the most amount of fun for the least amount of cost, and can you measure that in a numerical way? Sure, you could buy a Porsche 911 GT2 RS and it would literally blow any Boxster away. Or you could have any model of turbo and it would do the same thing. But what if we take those halo models and special editions out of the equation, because they falsely skew the averages of BHP and cost, for not many cars sold in comparison to the Carrera and GTS models. Moreover, the Boxster has never had any halo models like the Porsche 911 GT or Turbo cars to retaliate with. So as a fair apples to apples comparison, let's compare the models that are most comparable. Comparing a GT3 against a Boxster S is apples to oranges. So, as you'll see here, I have lined up the Boxster model with its 911 big brother of the day. That's our starting position. But how do we define fun? Surely that's a term that is subjective. Well, no, I'm going to use the power to weight ratio as the best measure of fun. How much power the car produces per tonne. We can compare cars using that metric. I've spent time entering in all the used Porsche Boxsters and all the used Porsche 911s into a spreadsheet, taking them from a well-known car aggregator website. So these are all the used or non-new Porsche 911 and Boxster cars on the market. It doesn't matter where you're watching this because it will be proportionately the same in your country, I'm sure. So I have looked at all the cars and have created averages of each Boxster and 911 range. Remember, these two ranges largely line up in terms of the dates they were manufactured, so a good comparison can be made. So, here we go. Let's start with the Porsche 996 version of the 911 and the 986 of the Boxster. As you can see, if you just look at average horsepower, the 911 is by far the more attractive, but when you include weight, the BHP per tonne number is not far off. Pricing, on the other hand, is almost double that of a Boxster. So as our first answer, the 986 Boxster on average is 90% of the fun for just 50% of the price. Put another way, you pay 100% Porsche 911 tax if that's really what you want, and only get around 10% more fun. Let's see what the Porsche 997 version of the 911 and the 987 of the Boxster then, and see what that looks like. Well, here we are. Average fun factor of 214 bhp per tonne for the Porsche 997 and 203 for the Porsche 987. On the price front, the 987 is also around half the price in the used market of the Porsche 997 at 49%. So in the case of the Porsche Boxster 987, it is 95% of the fun for 49% of the price. Moving on, the Porsche 991.1 version lines up with the Porsche 981 Boxster. Average power to weight ratio of the 911 is 235 bhp per tonne, and for the Boxster is 221 bhp per tonne. And the Boxster is, on average, 61% of the price. So 94% of the fun for 61% of the price. Lastly, the 718 with its 4-cylinder engine, which caused people to complain about it even more than normal, provides us with our biggest surprise. It actually produces more fun than the 911. On average, its power to weight ratio is greater than the 911 Carrera and GTS models. So for 50% of the price of a 991.2 or 992, you could get a Porsche Boxster 718, which gives you 104% of the fun of a 911. And if we take the overall average of all ranges of Porsche Boxster and put them against all ranges of the 911 brothers, you can say that 59% of the price of a 911, you get 97% of the fun. And when you look at it like that, the Porsche Boxster is a 911 killer. Thank you for watching. If you are a fact fan and like this kind of content, perhaps you'd consider subscribing. It would also be a help to leave me a like if you wouldn't mind. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. All the best to you and to your families.